I know a couple of people normally are going to be here and not here tonight, so we should see how things progress. Give it another minute and we shall start. Mark was trying to get on before. Maybe through Adina's. Let's see. Welcome, Brownsteins. Welcome, Arnold. Oh, Adina. Mark and Adina, or just Mark. I don't know. Welcome. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to start with, we already read Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17. I'm going to start at the beginning because we're only a couple psukim into it in the review and going into more depth. We've done the first couple psukim, but I just want to start from the beginning instead of starting at Pasuk Gimel. Okay, so chapter 17, Melachim Bet. Bishnat 12 la'achaz melech Yehuda. In the 12th year of the reign of Achaz, king of Yehuda, Malach Hoshea ben Elah b'Shomron al Yisrael tesha shanim. So Hoshea ben Elah, who we know becomes the last king of the northern kingdom, is king for and serves for 9 years and rules for 9 years in the Shomron. Again, the Shomron being the capital of the northern kingdom. He didn't do the greatest. He wasn't one of the worst kings, but he also wasn't one of the greater ones. That's what Yirmiyahu tells us, the author of the Sefer. Then, starting with Pasuk Gimel, we get to you'll see on the slide, the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the end of the northern kingdom. Alav Allah Shalman Eser Melech Ashur. So the king of Assyria, at this time now named Shalman Eser, comes specifically against Hoshea ben Elah. He comes in unopposed. He comes in not with guns blazing, so to speak. And what does he do? What happens? Vayhi lo Hoshea eved vayashav lo. So Hoshea becomes subservient to him, to the king of Assyria, and he gives him a what's it called? Not a gift. That's not the word I'm looking for. He becomes there's a word, a tribute. He pays him a tribute. Yes. Daled. This is more or less where we left off last week. Vayimtza melech Ashur where we read the pasuk, we didn't get to any depth yet. Vayimtza melech Ashur b'Hoshea kesher. The king of Assyria, who has been getting his payment and things have been going along for a while, suddenly realizes that he sees he's being betrayed. Why? Asher shalach malachim el so melech Mitzrayim, because Hoshea ben Elah has now sent messengers to the king of Egypt, whose name was So, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. V'lo he'elah mincha lemelech Ashur kishana v'shana, and he stopped paying his tribute to the king of Ashur, of Assyria. Vayatzreu melech Ashur vayasreu beit Keleb. So he was basically arrested. He was taken in. So we're going to talk about a couple of things here. Let me go into screen share. So as you see on the screen, I call this the beginning of the end. You'll see throughout the evening why I say that. Okay, so let's take a look at this citation, this commentary from the Dat Sofrim. It says, Melech El So Melech Mitzrayim. The unusual thing about this is that until now, more or less, and we know this from Chumash as well, the king of Egypt is known as Paro, Pharaoh in English, And that wasn't a name, it was a title. As you've heard of in the history books, the pharaohs of Egypt. So he's named. It says, so Melech Mitzrayim. Kol Malchei Mitzrayim ad Yemei Shlomo Melech, all the kings of Egypt, up till the days of King Shlomo, Nikru b'Torah u'v'nevi'im b'shem Paro Stam. They were just called Paro. B'tkufa shelachar zeh, in the time period after that, Nikru b'shmam ha'prati. They were then called after that by their private name. Now remember, you might remember in the middle of Sefer Melachim Aleph, we meant Shishak. Now we have So, Paro Neko, who we will meet in a few weeks. HaParonim she'ad Yemei Shlomo lo heizu lifgoa b'Yisrael. The Paros before Shlomo did not have the gall, the temerity, the chutzpah to go against Israel. Mipnei shezachar hamakot shehuku al yedei bnei Yisrael adayin kayam haya betocham ve'im chardu mehem. It's telling us that until the time of Shlomo, there wasn't a king of Egypt who felt secure enough to attack the Jewish people, because the collective memory of the Egyptians, including the Jews, still remembers hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years earlier what Hashem did to the people of Egypt before the Jewish people went on left Egypt. Once they decided to not be so nice to the Jews, and we don't necessarily at this point have any reason to believe they were attacking the Jews, but they didn't have that same collective memory, that same gnawing feeling inside that they really shouldn't attack the Jews. Suddenly they get names because they're individuals now. They become their own person, so to speak. They're not connected to that historical past of theirs in their collective memory. That's first thing. The second thing we want to mention is the expression that's used in the pasuk. There's two. Vaya'atzrehu, vaya'asrehu. Arrested and held, captured. He was bound. So what's going on here? If you were, not you, God forbid, if someone were to step into the shoes of the king of Assyria, and here he had a vassal named Hoshea ben Elah, who was paying him a certain amount of money every month, every year, whatever it was, and then you find he's going behind your back. Number one, he stops paying you. Number two, he is going behind your back and looking to the king of Egypt for help. What would you have done? You would have killed him, more than likely. But he doesn't do that. Asru la'achar shekavash et ha'ir. It says that he basically, let's just use the word arrested. He arrested him after he conquered the city. Velo emiteu ela heglehu. He did not put him to death, but rather he sent Hoshea ben Elah into galut, into the exile. Bezeh haya rachaman yoter mimelech Bavel bizman shekavash et Yerushalayim. In this respect, he, the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, was more merciful than the king of Bavel, who will then conquer in about over 100 years from now, the Yerushalayim, who will obviously not be such a good guy. Hoshea amda zechut sheyatov mimalchei Yisrael shelefanav. What stood in his good stead, what helped Hoshea ben Elah, was that he was, remember the parak starts off by saying he wasn't as bad as the other kings of Israel, which, we just finished Parshat Noach and the famous Rashi of Yeshed Dorshim L'Shevach, Yeshed Dorshim L'Gnai. Some look at it negatively, but Noach, some positively. But right now, in this light, Basher Husham, as he is, as we see him, Hoshea ben Elah, relatively speaking, wasn't such a terrible person. Had this been Menachem, has it been Yerovam ben Nevat, it would have been a different story. But somehow, what he did do positively allowed him to get away without being executed by the king of Assyria. Let's take a look now. Let me take it off the screen share. We'll come back to it. Okay, let's take a look now at the next pasuk. Hey, number 5. Vaya'al melech Ashur b'chol haaretz. The king of Assyria now went all across the land. Vaya'al Shomron, and he came to the Shomron. Vayatzar aleha shalosh shanim, and he laid siege against the area of Shomron for 3 years. Now I'm going to read another pasuk. Let me see if I'm going to do another pasuk. Yes, one more pasuk, and then I'm going to pose a question that I want to see if anyone here happens to have a potential answer. So first we see he lays siege against Shomron. Bishnat Shi'it Hoshea, in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, Lachad Melech Ashur at Shomron. So the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, was able to conquer, capture the Shomron. Vayegel et Yisrael Ashura. I'm going to come back to that word, which is a little quite unusual usage of a diktuk word, of a word. Instead of saying Vayagel, Vayigel, he sent the people of the northern kingdom into Assyria. Vayoshev otam, and he settled them or brought them to the names of these places: Bachalach, Chavor, Nahar Gozan, V'arei Madai. Okay. We know if you look at the Jewish calendar, and we're going to discuss this at length when we get to around Parak Kaf Gimel, Kaf Dal, the last two prakim. We know that we have a fast day that's coming up in a couple months, Asara B'Tevet. It's this year, by the way, an unusual one. Last time this happened was 11 years ago, which is the fast is going to be on a Friday. You go into Shabbat fasting. They say that if the Jewish calendar would work such that Asara B'Tevet would fall on a Shabbat, you'd still have to fast. That commemorates the siege against Jerusalem. We know we have another fast day in the summer, which is not the immediate one historically that took place afterwards, but later we'll talk about that. That commemorates the breach in the wall around Jerusalem. Again, not the wall you see today. That's a new wall. It's only 500 years old. And then, of course, Tisha B'Av 3 weeks later, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. We don't have a single commemoration, nothing, of this siege. This is 3 years. The Jews end up going into the Galut. A large amount of people died. Nothing in our calendar. We don't sit on the floor. We don't fast. Nothing. Why? Why do you think? Feel free to pitch in and think if you have any ideas. If you're not sure, just
the Malchut of Israel was illegal.
Okay.
It had no genetic historic basis. It was based on whoever had the fastest sword and was standing when the sword play finished.
Okay. However, before you go on, think about how it started. Hashem comes, tells the Navi, who then says that right after Shlomo dies, he says that he's going to split the kingdom. Hashem is the one that split it. Yes, it was based on some problems of the Jewish people themselves, but Hashem is the one who split it. So I don't know if I can say illegal per se, but you're on the right track. Keep your thoughts going because you're on the right track.
Divrei Yamim, as you say, is dealing with what the Malachim of
Yehuda.
Yehuda did,
Right.
not Malchut Israel.
Right.
That's our Hemshech. This is an aberration.
Okay.
So it's an aberration then? Very
good. Okay, excellent. So we're going to see the next few minutes now is look at some slides. What sort of what you're talking about, and it's going to be more or less correct. We're going to see. We're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. And is it not? Let's assume for a second. Actually, let me backtrack. On Tisha B'Av, Jews around the world sit on the floor. We recite kinot, elegies of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. But along the way, we also have kinot that are written for the times of the Middle Ages, various communities, Worms, Spire, Magenza, that were destroyed. We have Rav Schwab Zatzal wrote a kina, which he called the Kina Achronah for the Churban Acharon, for the world, for the Holocaust. You couldn't write one kina for the Shomron? Nothing? We say nothing about the Shomron? Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of points now. And it's going to change my a perspective I gave you last week on some psukim that are coming up. Okay. Make this a bit bigger. Okay. Matzor, this is again, almost, unless I tell you differently, all these slides that look like this are all from the Dot Sofrim. Matzor Shomron, I'm going to start right here. Matzor Shomron arach yoter mi Matzor Yerushalayim. The siege around Shomron was longer than Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was a year and a half, approximately. This is 3 years. B'chol zot lo izkira navi mila achat al ma shaya betocha. No, there's no word whatsoever about what occurred during this time period in the Shomron when they were under siege. Ketzad uve'eze yom nafla. We don't even know when it was. I can tell you Asara B'Tevet. I can tell you Shiva Sabat Tammuz. I can tell you Tisha B'Av. When did this happen? What month? What date? What year? No, nothing. Kama nehergu. We have no idea how many were killed. Umi nishar v'chayim, and who lived. V'vaday hayu ba'agam mazei ra'av. For sure, there was a tremendous amount of famine and people were sick. Uparanuyot acherot, and other kinds of ills that occurred. Shomron b'mei Yehoram le'el in Perek Vav. Kafei. U'chumo b'Yerushalayim ha'netzura be'atid. Just like in the future time, when Yerushalayim would also be besieged, where these things did happen, illnesses and sicknesses and deaths and all kinds of things. Again, just think this, we talked about this before when we referred to a siege before months ago, where just take a look at modern day Yerushalayim and the night before the establishment of the state of Israel, after that, all those times when there's a siege, there's definite results that happen in terms of health, in terms of medicine, in terms of everything. Not a word here. Avalon nechtav al kach. Nothing. We're going to look at the beginning of Sefer Micha in a minute. You know, it doesn't make any mention. Yirmiyahu mentions nothing here, but in the prophet Micha, again, we're going to look at this in a minute, tells us it seems that it was utterly destroyed down to the foundations. So he supposes that there was probably some preparation in advance for this the siege. And going to the next slide, just continuing, but they had evidently prepared themselves for a long siege. Just like before the second time the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, where they were prepared. I'm not going to get into that. We're going to see that way down the road. Next paragraph. Gam, my internet connection is unstable. Well, so am I. It's okay. We're even. Gam lo konenu anavim kinot al chuban Shomron. There is no kina written for this destruction in the Shomron. Why? Because it would have been impossible to say Echa yashva badad Shomron v'chadome. We couldn't have used the same words Yirmiyahu used in the beginning of Echa. Echa yashva badad ha'ir rabati am haita. Right? These words could not be spoken about the Shomron. Why? And now, Aryeh, you listen to this part here. Ki haya davar barur me'od. It was very clear. Shelo yuchal liot kiyum lemamlacha Yisraelit kazot. There could not be a continuity of this type of government of kingdom. Av shegam berata gdola bioter. Tova hayta le'en aroch migoyim acherim. Aval lo hayta ma she'Hashem chafatz haya shetiyeh. This is not how it was meant to be. Move that down for a minute because that's my spoiler alert down there. This is not how it meant to be. So Aryeh, you're right. What is Israel? What's the beating heart of Israel? It's Yerushalayim. So therefore, Malchut Yehuda is the legitimate kingdom. Even though Hashem himself is the one who told the people that the kingdom was going to be split. Nevertheless, the legitimate one, the more proper one, the one, the place, the Makom Sheivchar Hashem, the Shaken Shmo Sham is Yerushalayim. So to then turn around and to say a kina about the Shomron would not have been necessarily the most an appropriate thing. However, Look at this next sentence. And this is a brilliant insight. Remember last week, I read through the whole parak, almost the whole parak. And I said, we have about 20 psukim giving us a history lesson. Right, it's telling us how what happened. The Jews went out of Mitzrayim and how things were good and how they were given all these chances. And then the Nevi'im came and told them they're messing up and they keep messing up and and then they finally fall apart. I told you that that's part of the reason for that was not just the history lesson of how we got here, because this is the end of the Northern Kingdom, but because it's also a message for every generation afterwards. Listen to what he says in one sentence. Remember, who wrote this book? Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu is the author of Sefer Melachim. What else did Yirmiyahu write? He wrote Eicha. He wrote the book of Eicha that we say on Tisha B'Av. Bimkom kinot, instead of writing kinot, tziva Hashem Yirmiyahu lichtov ktav ashma kidelahalan. The next 20 psukim that Yirmiyahu writes, he claims was written at the behest of Hashem, ki'ilu, as if it were a kina for the Northern Kingdom. It's not an uplifting one. It's not a positive one, but it is a kina, an elegy for what happened in the Northern Kingdom. So instead of having a separate reading on Tisha B'Av or a fast day, Hashem inserted into the book of Sefer Melachim this kina for the area of the Shomron for what happened. Now, what I want to do is take a look at the beginning of the prophet Micha. For those of you who have not heard of him, you may know, oops, hold on. Yeah. Come on. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. For those of you who have maybe not heard of the prophet Micha, he is one of what is known as the Treyasar. The Treyasar is the, in English, I don't like the name, it's called the 12 minor prophets. You'll see that almost every place. Treyasar is the 12 Nevi'im that are mentioned in one book that are somewhat known, some are lesser known, some are more known, and we know some of them because we read them as haftarahs. We have one that's the entire book is one parak. We have some that, for example, you know, Yonah. Yonah is read on Yom Kippur, Mincha. Others are very long. We take many haftarahs from Zechariah. The vision of a messianic era. Micha is not, to my recollection, read much. We do have a few psukim that are read from it, actually Yom Kippur, but it's not as well known. So I'm going to just read you a few psukim. I have the English translation here from Mechon Mamre, which I'm not a fan of the translation. This is a very old English translation. But just kind of run through so you get this feel, understand, because if you look in Sefer Melachim, all you see is there was a matzor, there was a siege, lasted 3 years, boom. Okay, move along. But listen to this. I'll kind of run through this. I'm not going to spend much time on it. Dvar Hashem asher haya l'micha morashti b'mei Yotam achaz Yechizkiyahu malchei Yehuda asher chazal Shomron v'Yerushalayim. First thing we know is we meet this man Micha. He gave prophecy in the time of Yotam. We remember him. Achaz, who is also he's now he was at the same time, and then comes Yechizkiyahu. Remember, we're right at the beginning of this parak, or actually the end of the last one said, but Chizkiyahu becomes king of Yehuda. But in the meantime, we're going to go back to the Northern Kingdom. Shimu amim kulam akshivia eretz umloa. Listen to you, all the people of earth. V'Hashem Elokim bachem leed Hashem mechel kodsho. So they're calling on the world and God to be witnesses to what he's saying. Kine Hashem yotzei mimkomo. Hashem has come out of his place. V'yarad v'darach abamote aretz. He will come down. He's going to step on the high places of the earth. Again, if this were a class in Micha, I would go into more depth. V'namasu erim tachtav v'amakim yitbaka'u kadonag mipnei ha'esh k'mayim mugarim b'morad. It's the English. The mountain shall be molten under him. They mean like the melt, and the valley shall be split as wax before fire, as waters that are poured down on a steep place. Doesn't sound like portending a very good future at this point. V'fesha Yaakov kol zot v'chatot Beit Yisrael mipesha Yaakov halo Shomron. For the transgression of Yaakov was all this. And for the sins of the house of Israel, what is this transgression of Yaakov? Is it not the Shomron? And what are the high places of Yehuda? Is it not Yerushalayim? V'samti shomron le'i hasadeh lemata'e karem. I will therefore make the shomron a heap in the field and a place for the planting vineyards. V'garti lagai avaneha v'sodeha agale. I will pour down stones onto it into the valley, and I will cover the foundations thereof. This is what he was referring to in the Dot Sofrim when he was saying it seems that it was down to the it was taken down to the foundation of the Shomron. One more a couple more psukim. V'chopsile yukatu. All the graven images will be beaten into pieces. V'cholet naneha yisrefu ba'esh. V'chol atzabeh asim shemama. Ki mi'etnan zona kibatza ve'etnan zona yashuvu. Azot espeda ve'elila. So here he uses terminology we do come across in Kinot. He says, for this I will, he like his translation, I will wail and I will howl. Okay, fine. You go and wail and howl. Ilcha sholal ve'arom. I will go stripped and naked. Esem misped katanim. I will be wailing like the jackals. Ve'evel kivnot ya'ana. And I will be mourning like the ostriches. Obviously, there's a lot of metaphorical terminology here, but the bottom line is, without this, putting this in context and without seeing this, we wouldn't necessarily think that, okay, so it was a siege, big deal, 3 years, they were surrounded, blah, 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 they go into Galut, Shalom Yisrael. But we see it was a pretty severe series of events that were taking place there. Hold on a second. Okay, so now, hold on. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next pasuk. Oh, sorry, not the next pasuk. There's a word I said I wanted to mention to you. Okay, look back at the pasuk and using the word for galut or to exile says vayegel et Yisrael Ashura. Let's see what that means. Kan ne'emar on the screen. Kan ne'emar vayegel b'segol tachat hayud. Under the yud is a segol, an e. V'shem v'sham vayigel b'chirik tachat hayud. V'chein ne'emar begalut Yehuda in kafdal tedvav vayegel b'segol agalut yoyachin. Aval agalut Yisrael bichlal lahalan kafei kafalf. I'll explain all this in a minute. Ne'emar vayigel b'chirik. B'nikud zeh. With this nikud, the e sound instead of the e sound, Ramaz Navi bekitzur al tiv hagalut. There was a bit of a remez, of a hint, by the Navi, by Yirmiyahu, on the let's just say the galut, the exile itself. Vayegel, the good part of it. Vayegel besegol hu lashon maf'il. Hagalut ba'a tachat lachatz kashe shel ha'ashurim. Vayigel b'chirik. משמעותו שבעיקר הלכו לבדם לגולה. רובם עזב את הארץ לפני כיבושה, כמו שהיה גם ביהודה כדברי ירמיהו. I'm just going to give you a free translation here, definitely not word by word, and definitely not a dikduk lesson. The different binyanim in Hebrew, which may sometimes sound almost identical, what they actually are doing, take off of here, what they're actually doing is also giving a different perspective on the meaning of the word. He's telling us that they not only were taken into Galut, but some chose to leave on their own. How they did it, when they did it, is we don't have in the text. We can't see that. But it was a different type of going into Galut than would happen in a few more chapters from now when the rest of the Jewish people go into Galut. Take a look now, please, at, let me see if I'm able to do this. Yeah, take a look at the same pasuk we're in. The second half says, Vayoshev Otam, and he lists the name of places. So let's take a look. Sorry, I keep jumping off the screen share here. I'm gonna come back to it. Whoops. Okay. You remember last week I mentioned the rockabye baby syndrome? I think I mentioned it last week. Though we read something, and unless you really pay attention, you miss the gravity of that particular moment. The example I gave last week was Akedat Yitzchak, which we'll read about in a few weeks, the binding of Yitzchak by Avraham Avinu. Because we know he lives, even though there's a midrash that says that the afarosh shel Yitzchak, the ashes of Yitzchak were brought before the Kisei HaKavod, they were brought to his mother Sarah. There's a piyut about that as well. But given as be that as may, just looking at the plain text, the Torah is telling us we know that Avraham obviously does not kill his son Yitzchak. But that's because we know that before the story begins. But if we didn't, we should shudder when we hear the beginning of the narrative. Here is a man who's waited his whole life for this moment, for his child. He has a child, he's growing up, and now Hashem tells him, go and kill him. Same thing is in this pasuk. I kind of read through it. But this is, as you see the title that the Dat Sofrim gives to this section, Siyum Parashat Aseret HaShvatim. This is the end of the entire existence, for the most part, let's say, of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. It's done. In these couple words, Vayegel et Yisrael Ashura, Vayoshev Otam, Bechlachlach, etc., etc., etc. It's the end. Look what he says. If you think this isn't, I wouldn't say it's not sad. Of course it's sad, but it's when we get to the end of the book, it's a heck of a lot sadder. B'chatzi pasuk echad, in a half a pasuk, Misayem hanavi b'shem Hashem et parashat aseret hashvatim, shema'asu b'malchut Shlomo. These 10 tribes, in a sense, despised, ridiculed, hated, were all kinds of other words. The Malchut of Shlomo, the Malchut Yehuda. V'ha'adifu Malchut Yerovam, and they preferred the Malchut Yerovam. Shema'asu b'Malchut Asa, v'ha'adifu Malchut Basha. Shema'asu b'Malchut Yehoshaphat, v'ha'adifu Malchut Achav. These are just different kings between Yehuda and Shomron. And he says that they preferred this king of the Shomron over the king of Yehuda. And of course, everything with it, i.e., especially the Beit HaMikdash. Shedimu letamei Beit Malchut Yehuda al yidei bat Achav shehitchatna bahem v'chazru lemalchut Yehuda gam bizman sherau et kitzam karov v'hadifu et Hoshea ben Elah al Chizkiyahu. Not only did they prefer the kings that they had in the northern kingdom over the kings of Yehuda, even at the very end, when they saw the writing on the wall, by the way, that comes from Sefer Daniel, they saw the writing on the wall, that when they knew already of King Chizkiyahu, who, as I mentioned to you last week, and we will see soon in the next couple of weeks, was almost able to have been a great tzaddik, like it could have been Mashiach, they still preferred Hoshea ben Elah. Again, a person who had them at least leading them in the same direction as prior kings, which was not a very good thing. And we move down. Ne'emar shehem heglu lebachlach levchavor nar gozen v'arei madai. It lists the places they were sent to. What happened with them? Tens of thousands of people. What's their future? Where were they? What was going on with them? Shum davar barur lo nemar. There's absolutely nothing. There's no mention of their lives there, what was going on, what happened, how long. Heim chadlu liot chashuvim b'nei Hashem. They ceased to be important in the eyes of God. V'shuv lo diber alehem, and he no longer spoke of them. V'lo tziva, continuing next slide. Whoa, let's make that smaller. V'lo tziva lichtov alehem. Why did that happen? Okay. V'lo tziva lichtov alehem, and nor did he even command that a Navi should write anything about them. Next paragraph. K'fi hanir'eh mima shenemar b'mkomot shonim, nitztaref chelek mehem libnei Yehuda. Based on some other writings in other places, it seems that some of them joined the Bnei Yehuda, without it being known. I guess they maybe slipped back, they slipped into the area of Yehuda, don't know. Ulam shemam v'zichram nishar ke'avud ad hayom hazeh. We know nothing about them. Interestingly enough, for those of you who have learned, I'm looking for my glasses, for those of you who've learned Sefer Ezra, you will know that a little over 10,000 people returned in the first Aliyah back to Israel after the Galut Bavel. And their names are mentioned. The family names are all mentioned in Sefer Ezra. We know a lot about them. We know a lot about what happened in Bavel. We know a lot about what happened when they came back. We know about the ups and downs of rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, and what Nehemiah had to face when he came back to try to get the ball rolling again. Nothing about the people from the Shomron. Nothing seems to be written.
Like Yirmiyahu tried to get back.
Say again?
Yirmiyahu tried to persuade them to come back.
Absolutely, but to no avail.
Right. So it's not as if nothing ever was said.
Right, but we don't have the kind of detail that we have about the Jews that were sent into Galut, into Bavel, as we have. We don't have for them what we have for the Galut Bavel at all. Not even close. There's no extra sefer. There's nothing. Hardly a mention.
And a lot of them came down to Hezekiah's.
Right. That's what he's saying. That's what he said here. Exactly. That's correct.
Jerusalem really expanded a lot after this, actually.
It did. Because again, as I mentioned once, I'll mention another couple dozen times probably before we finish the Sefer, that even though in most people's minds, the Jews of the north, even if they know that there were 3 stages to the Galut, there was a little bit, a last chapter, there's the rest of the 10 tribes now, and then it's going to be area of Yerushalayim. In most people's minds, in many people's minds, that happened boom, 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 one after the other. Like you had now this Galut, and then maybe a few weeks later, the rest of the Jewish people go. We're talking over 100, 130 years till the final straw for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and Malchut Yehuda ceases to be in Israel at that moment, at least. So you're right. I think that's another important fact that we can't lose sight of, and that is what was one of the main themes running through Sefer Melachim. It ran through Sefer Shoftim, but especially in Sefer Melachim. We talked about this last week and the week before, and that is Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah that took place in the Northern Kingdom, even though they were already seeing some things happening in the area of Yehuda, we're going to put that aside, was so rampant, was so supported and enabled by its leaders, by the man on the street, that Hashem said, enough. You're going to be going into Galut. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Now, if you take a look, it's going to sound like, where's he going with this? If you take a look at the Aseret HaDibrot, you'll notice that we know that there's 5 and 5, right? And you learn that the first 5 are Ben Adam LaMakom, the mitzvot between Hashem and man, and the last 5 are between man and his fellow man, Ben Adam LaChavero, and then the 5th one of Kaberet Avicha V'Timecha is a bridge because it goes to both groupings. But there are some commentaries, among them I believe is the Or HaChaim, that also makes a connection between the Dibrot, one across from the other. So if you have the first of the Aseret, number 1, and across from it is number 6, he makes a connection between the two. Number 2 and number 7 go together. Number 2 is Lo Yeh Lecha Elohim Achivim Al Panai. You can't have foreign gods. You can't worship Avodah Zarah. The one that's across from it is Lo Tin'af, not to commit adultery. Because the ultimate betrayal of Hashem is Avodah Zarah. He can forgive a lot of things, but he's not going to forgive Avodah Zarah that's been so rampant for literally generation after generation, and after having sent one Navi after another Navi after another Navi to try to stop them, to start to warn them to change their ways. Wait a second, there was something coming to my head there for a minute. Hold on. He sent them for generation. Avodah Zarah. Oh man, I had a thought. Hold on. Just blanked. I hate when that happens. 1 minute. It'll come back to me. Ugh. Okay, so I'll just continue. Maybe it'll pop back in my head. So this idea of this lack of mention of us not knowing much about sounds, wow, that's really not so fair. Maybe let's at least let us know a little bit. But because they had betrayed Hashem over generation after generation after generation, and finally Hashem said, that's it, we're done. You're out of here. Like it was being thrown out of the house. I don't have anything to do with you anymore. We're done. And that's part of the reason why the structure is such that we don't really have much mention about the Northern Kingdom after this particular point. It's bothering me now that I don't remember what it was I was going to say. Okay. Oh, well. It couldn't have been that important, I guess. Maybe it was even wrong. I had a teacher in elementary school that always said, when you have something to say, if the teacher doesn't call you right, write it down. Yeah, maybe I should have listened to him. Oh, well. Anyways, I want to go back for a moment to the book of Ezra, and there's a reason for that. There's nothing to do directly with this particular moment that's in our Navi. I mentioned that in the book of Ezra, it mentions almost like a roll call or an honor roll of the names of people who came back to Israel after the Galut. For those of you who may be aware of the calendar, there was a date that was established in the state of Israel. I don't know if it was just last year or 2 years ago. It's called Aliyah Day. It was to celebrate all those of us, everyone here, who made Aliyah, whether it was a year ago or Aryeh, it was 40 years now. Something like that. You're on mute, sorry. You have to unmute yourself. Here, let me unmute you. There.
There?
Yeah. How many years?
Little over 38.
Little over 38. Okay. So today's Aliyah. I don't know, Kyle, when did you make Aliyah?
Must have been 1982, the year before me.
Ah, okay. So I guess you are. The Brownsteins maybe are longer. How long are you here?
Come and meet my 17th generation grandchildren.
Baruch Hashem. Yes, Dave, what year? Sorry?
34. 86.
86. Okay. Wow. That's beautiful. Baruch Hashem. So picture this. It's the time of the 70 years of the Galut. I know I'm jumping way ahead, but there's a reason for it. You'll see. It's 70 years of Galut. And I think my battery's going to die. Just a second. No, I should be okay. 70 years of Galut. And now the Jews are given the okay. Korah says, okay, here we go, guys. You guys have permission. You can go back. The doors are open. Go make Aliyah. Well, you know, Teanach's a nice place. And I have, what about Parnassa? And what am I supposed to do? And we're going to stay here. So the rule was that those who were going to go on, the people who were staying behind had to fund those who were making Aliyah. And that's what happened. And a very small percentage, when the door opened, made Aliyah and went back to Israel to help rebuild the country and to help rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, Ezra writes their names in an honor roll in perpetuity. So when you get to Sefer Ezra, if you ever do learn it, and you see all these names of these families, don't skip it. Read the names, because those are your names and my name, in a sense, historically, of those who decided to come. And there was no nefesh benefesh when most of you on my screen right now made Aliyah. Right? Not even close. And there was certainly no nefesh benefesh in the time of Ezra. I know.
You want to come, you come.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want to come? Here's a bucket. Go dig some sand out and make yourself a house. Today, it's, you know, relatively speaking, simple compared to when you all came many, many years ago. But at the time of Ezra, it was, let's just say, was not as simple as it was even when all of you came to Israel. None of that story exists for this Galut of what we're talking about now, the Shomron. None of it. There's no discussion about them being taken, no king being taken in chains, as we will see at the end of the book with Chizkiyahu. There's none of this, the coming back story coming up later in Navi, none of it. Because of the rejection of Hashem, of Avodah Zarah. When it comes to Avodah Zarah, oh, now I remember what I was going to say. See, I knew it would come back to me. And I'm going to prove to you how insidious the whole issue of Avodah Zarah truly is. There is a general rule that Machshava Tova Kadosh Baruch Hu Mitzarfa D'Maaseh, which means that if you had good intentions to do something, and for some legitimate reason you couldn't do it, let's say you were going to be driving to visit somebody in the hospital, and you got a flat tire, and now you can't go. So Hashem looks at it as if you went to the hospital. It doesn't mean you can get up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to give $1 million to tzedakah today. Okay, I don't have $1 million, but I thought about it. So no, doesn't mean that. It means something you really plan to do, and you don't do it. Hashem looks at it as if it was done. However, machshava ra'a, an evil thought, he is not mitzarfa de ma'aseh. Doesn't add it. That's its own shiur in itself. Why do you mean doesn't add it to a mitzvah? But it means if I have intention to go on my phone on Shabbat and text somebody, I really plan to do it. And then I say, no, I'm not going to. It's as if I didn't, because I didn't do it, with one exception. Avodah Zarah. If I have intention to say, you know what? I'm going to go into the Bible Lands Museum. I think they have some there. Little, for sure, near David, you find these little miniature idols that they were unearthed. So, next time I go there, I'm going to pray to one of those. But I mean it seriously, not just stop. I really, but I'm going to do that. And then I say, no, I'm not going to. That Hashem considers as if you did it. It's the only one. Because even thinking seriously about betraying Hashem in such a horrific way is something that Hashem will not stand for. And that's part of the reason that the punishment of the people of this area, the Shomron, becomes so difficult. I want to take a look now, one last screen. Oops. I keep saying oops tonight a lot, huh? This is a little bit of the Dat Sofrim's insight into the psukim we read last week. Those psukim, for those of you who were not here, dealt with, again, that history lesson of how the Jews were good, how they went on Mitzrayim, and then how everything started to fall apart, and then Hashem sent the Nevi'im, and they still didn't want to listen. Okay? I'm going to pick it up where it says, Ktav Hashama Uchtav Hazachut. V'fi Ktav Hashama Hazeh Nir'eh Ki ilu lo haya b'Yisrael shum davar tov. If you read through those psukim again, those next approximately 20 psukim, it almost seems like there was nothing good about the northern kingdom whatsoever, about the Jews. Af ki kama v'chama nevi'im gedolim yirei Hashem shiatzu mishvatim elu nizkarim b'sefer melachim. In spite of the fact that many nevi'im and many good leaders, good people came out of these shvatim, and we are mentioned even in Sefer Melachim, that none of those kind of people existed in any other nation to this very day. This entire, there's a word I want to use, but it's not, it doesn't make sense. So let's just say this indictment, because that'd be the modern term for it, is really directed at one issue. Lomar al shumah charva haaretz. It's telling us why was the land destroyed. Al ken im rotzim lekabel tmuna shlema mimatzav am Yisrael. If you want to get a good full picture of the situation of Am Yisrael, yesh letzaref ktav hashama gam ktav zchut. In addition to the indictment, you have to also find something positive that was there. Shebo yiyu reshumim gam kol advarim hatovim shenasu b'Yisrael. You have to also list all the good things that happened. Miyom kibusha aretz ad galut ha'am, from the time that the land was conquered, in the time of Yehoshua, until they were sent into galut, into exile. Shebekocham yicholim hayu Yisrael lehisha'er kayamim ad hayom hazeh. In other words, and they're able to last in the land till now. Meaning, if you only looked at the next 20 psukim, you would also get a pretty bad picture. Like, how in the world did Hashem put up with the Jews for so long and allow them to be in this land for so long when they really utterly rejected Hashem for so many generations? Theoretically, so many of these good things would even be outweigh and be greater than the indictment. In spite of the fact that this could be a really positive statement, really even overpowering, it's not mentioned in the Sefer Melachim at all. In spite of the fact there were many good things that happened in these 10 tribes, there was no chance that they would be allowed to remain on the Holy Land. Yeter al ken, even more so. Lo nikba zman legalutam. I mentioned this before. We don't know when they went into galut. Kashem shenikba legalut mamlachet Yehuda. I can tell you exactly when the Jews went into galut after destruction of Beit HaMikdash in Malchut Yehuda. Omnam bimei hishtolalut Menashe v'Yoyakim hayta Yehuda Yehuda yoter me'aseret hashvatim. Even though in the time of Menashe and Yehoyakim, the situation in Malchut Yehuda was worse actually than the northern kingdom. Ulam elu hayu hitpartzuyot shel yichidim v'tofaot cholfot. These are just passing
Episodes.
episodes. Thank you. Hagalut aksara akrat yetzer avodah zara v'hukma mamlacha tova yoter. Hakilkul b'aseret hashvatim haya amok. The kilkul of the aseret shvatim was deep. V'amad lehitраchev ilu hayta hamamlacha mamshicha lehitkayem ve'ilu huchzeru kichida nifredet. He claims, again, this is Dat Sofrim, that had Hashem allowed these shvatim to remain in Shomron, in the northern territory, that things would have gotten even worse and worse by the day. What we're going to do, Bezrat Hashem, next week, we're going to start looking at that indictment. Those 20 psukim or 18 psukim we read last week. We're going to start looking at them. I see my battery's about to die, so this is perfect timing. And start getting into a little bit more detail about them, Bezrat Hashem. So I wish you all a Shavua Tov, and see you next week, Bezrat Hashem. All right.
Thank you very much.
Be well, everybody. Thanks.